Good morning, everybody. Give you a few minutes. Well, we'll give others a few minutes to join, and then we'll get started. Thanks so much.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Sharita, Commissioner Carter said she'd be out today.
Thanks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, we're at quorum. We'll get started. Ebony, are you back? Give me a few seconds. You gonna open the gate? Yeah. Not open the gate. Yeah, but I thought when it opens 911, y'all. Is it? Not the one over here. Give me just a few more seconds. Somebody just needed access to the clinic. Give me a second. Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm sorry about that. Ebony, you're back.
Yes.
All right. We'll officially call our meeting to order at 10:36 a.m. I know that Angel said that she was at the polls this morning. Her plan was to try to get on when she could. So we will anticipate her dropping in for some of the time. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes? All right, if there are no corrections that need to be made, I will entertain a motion.
Ms. Helen, I move to accept the minutes.
I second.
And Ebony seconded. So moved by Helen, and seconded by Ebony. All those in favor, yes, in the chat box, just so we have a record. All right, our motion carries. The next item on our agenda are our new COC liaisons. And I think I see them on the call, Tammy Lawrence and Jerome Stevens. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I know that Tammy is the new executive director for Families Moving Forward. I'm sorry, I'm gonna turn on my camera for a little bit. And that Jerome Stevens runs a nonprofit that services veterans in our community. Is that correct, Mr. Stevens? You're on mute.
Please forgive me. Yes, I am. We are in a startup fundraising mode right now. We are continuously fundraising, but that is exactly what we'll be doing.
Well, thank you for your eagerness to join the continuum of care. I hope that you gain knowledge and resources to be able to help you progress your work. And that extends to you as well, Tammy, as an organization that already gets some COC funding. But we welcome you. We thank you for being willing. And we hope that not only you gain some information from us, but we gain some valuable information, skills, tools, and resources from you guys as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharita. It's good to be here.
Great, 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 great. So, Hanalea, the next item is our checking in on our unsheltered singles and families update. Do you have that information ready, or do we need to move to the next item and give you some time?
I do have the information ready. Good morning, everybody. So as of now, we have 19 literally homeless families and 78 literally homeless singles on the waiting list for shelter.
All right, guys. That tells us that there's still work to do. Thank you for that information. And I will move right along. We will discuss setting the priority for our new and reallocated COC funded projects. Lord, are you ready to present?
I am. Good morning, everyone. Lloyd Schmeidler, Community Development Department. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen if I may. Let me see if I can.
And while you're doing that, hi, Russ. It's good to see you.
Hopefully you can share my screen. This is a portion of a memo that I did forward to Chair Sharita McCullers at the end of last week. Essentially, the department, as the lead agency, is recommending to the Policy and Planning Committee that permanent supportive housing for persons who meet the definition of an eligible dedicated plus project participant should be the priority for funds available through reallocation and any permanent housing bonus funds available in the upcoming 2022 Continuum of Care Homeless Grants Competition. We are anticipating that there will be the reallocated funds available for one or more new projects in the 2022 competition. The Durham Crisis Response Center, which initially received a domestic violence bonus project in the 2018 competition and had two subsequent renewals in the 2019 and in 2020, has decided to not apply for renewal funds that would be available for the project in 2022. And we believe that the renewal amount for that project is going to be in the neighborhood of $167,000, which was the amount that the project was renewed for in the 2020 through the 2020 COC renewal process. So that plus the permanent housing bonus suggests that we may have as much as about $257,000 or more dollars available for new projects in this year's competition. Plus, HUD has informally informed us that they are planning to do another domestic violence bonus competition with the 2022 competition, and we anticipate that Durham will be eligible to apply for as much as $140,000 or more dollars for that competition in 2022 as well. So I'm scrolling down in the memo that I sent Sharita, suggesting that overall we're anticipating we may be able to apply for over $2 million in the 2022 competition, with most of that being needed by the renewals, $1,725,000 for that, and then the remainder for new projects. The domestic violence bonus project, to be clear, would need to be specifically for survivors of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, but it would not need to be applied for by a victim service provider organization. It could be applied for by a general organization that is willing to target the use of the funds to survivors of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. With that, I will be available for questions or invite the committee's action on the recommendation. This recommendation would be forwarded, if it's approved by this committee, or whatever funding recommendation, priority recommendation the committee wishes to make, would be forwarded to the Homeless Services Advisory Committee for final approval at its meeting next week on May 18th for final approval.
Lloyd, I have a question.
That was Drew, yes?
Yep. So one thing I'm curious about is sort of, eventually it would come to this, right? So exactly how is a priority expressed, right? So if a normal application is sort of just has no multiplier, right? Do we use a multiplier of 1.2 or 1.4 or 2.0, right? To kind of weight an application that hits one of our priorities, or because I think it would be helpful to tell the HSAC exactly how the priority will be expressed, right?
Okay.
And sort of also how it will not be expressed, right? Because we're not exactly saying that PSH proposals would absolutely, no matter what quality, would be considered before any of the other ones, right? So we just need to be clear, I think, what we're saying about how these will be handled.
That's a good point. I'm not sure you can see my screen.
We can see your screen.
You can?
Yes.
Okay, so I've switched my screen at least to the new project evaluation tool.
When you switch the screen, no, we're still seeing the same report, Lloyd.
All right, so
I think you have to reshare, like reshare the new screen, I guess.
yes. All right, so currently,
There we go.
Yep.
All right, so I mean, the Performance Management Committee is responsible for approving the evaluation tool that we use to evaluate new project applications. And currently, question 5 of that tool asks, does the project address priority that's been adopted by the COC board for permanent housing project applications? And if it does, they get 10 additional points. So it's about a 10% bonus.
Can I probe, Lloyd?
Yes.
So one way of thinking about this is that, we would probably not ever want to be funding things that weren't priorities, right? And so, and among our priorities, right, we would maybe have in a given year a different sense of what might need to be funded. I guess even seeing this, which I appreciate, my sense that is that perhaps we might benefit from a slightly more sophisticated sort of weighting system than just yes, no, because again, I'm not really sure why we would be funding things that weren't priorities. Or maybe each year we choose a single priority, and that's what we mean here, right? That's our top priority, and we'll give that 10 points and nothing else. We'll get it. Just not sure.
So in the past, I think it's been an option for us to set priorities, just recognizing what we need in our system. Am I correct in saying, Lord, we don't necessarily have to set one? This is just a recommendation from the staff based on kind of our deficits right now, what our needs primarily are in order to serve folks. Is that correct?
That is correct. One of the other challenges, it is reflected too in the practices and the policies of the COC, is that we encourage applications from organizations that are not currently receiving COC funds. And at the end of this evaluation tool, there's a bonus for projects, applications from new organizations. They do get a 12 bonus points if they're currently not receiving COC funds. I mean, if this committee wants to get involved with recommending either that the COC lead agency or performance management consider providing more bonus points to projects that address the priority, we can look at that. The committee is the performance management committee has not yet adopted a tool for this year. This is the proposed new project scoring tool. I think all of the things being equal, I think COC would be, if, for example, we had 2 projects, new projects being applied for, one with meeting the priority and one not. And if the project that didn't meet the priority nevertheless scored higher on the evaluation tool than the project that did meet the priority, I think there'd be a difficult decision for the HSAC and the scoring committee to make in terms of the funding recommendations that we would make. So I think Drew's question does require some thought and consideration.
Lloyd, I added a follow-up question to the chat, but would this, I'm not looking at your original sheet, but would this sort of permanent supportive housing be the only priority which could potentially get this 10-point bonus in this for any kind of reallocations and any permanent housing bonus funds? Would it be the only priority for those?
That's the COC lead agency's recommendation, that this be the only priority. That is not to say that we could not have more than one projects that we recommend for funding to, if we have 2 or more projects meeting the recommendation, we could distribute funds to more than one project application. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. And is that other rubric clear that it's only for sort of reallocated funds, or that subset of our funding?
The new projects tool is specifically for new project applications, so that it's a different evaluation tool than what we use for the renewal projects.
Okay.
And again, this recommendation is from the COC lead agency staff. The committee can choose to make a different funding recommendation if you wish.
Any additional questions?
I'll make a motion to approve this recommendation for the particular subset of our funding as expressed in the scoring rubric currently.
I have a motion on the floor by Drew to accept the recommendation set before us by our lead agency. I will entertain a second. I've already asked if there are any additional questions. Does anybody need more information in order to move forward with this? This is an item I think that's required.
I'll second the motion. This is Helen.
All right, I got a second by Helen. Ready for the vote? All those in favor, please put in the chat box, yes or no, or if you need to abstain, please. Looks like the motion carries. Now, you will see this information again at the HSAC meeting. And if you have additional questions, that will be the time to bring those questions forward. I think I added in the chat box the link to the HUD exchange information on Dedicated Plus, just so folks can familiarize themselves with that language and what it means to our continuum, for our continuum. Hanalea, did you want to, I know that Dedicated Plus was something we voted on to prioritize. Was it last term? There were some specific points within that 5 points that we were specifically looking at. Did you want to talk about that just a little bit real quick so folks just know what groups we were trying to really target in that under Dedicated Plus that we hadn't been targeted in the past?
Yeah, so it's really, the way to understand it is really more of a difference in documentation rather than a difference in groups. So what Dedicated Plus gives us is a little bit more flexibility for clients who may have certain issues with their documentation of chronicity in order to still be able to prioritize them. So for instance, a client who may not be able to document the required gaps in their homelessness, who hasn't had 12 consecutive months. It just gives us a bit more leeway for that kind of client. Or for a client who may have had an interruption, like who went through permanent supportive housing and became homeless again and has their chronicity, but the documentation isn't quite there because they had an interruption. It just gives us a bit more flexibility with clients who have documentation issues with their homeless history. That's the primary thing we're trying to target.
Thanks very much for that, Holly. I knew it was some important pieces in there as to why it was important for that Dedicated Plus language to be present in that recommendation.
Yeah, And what I'll add, Sharita, is, we had a conversation last month about the way that documentation requirements are exacerbating racial equity issues in the COC. So pursuing things like Dedicated Plus that allow us to be more flexible with documentation will support us in our efforts to address our racial equity issues.
Thanks for that.
If I could add, Sharita Lloyd again, that as I expressed in the memo, we, particularly with the reallocated funds, we're hopeful to actually get a new project in the 2022 competition, where last year our Dedicated Plus project ended up in tier 2 and was not funded by HUD, although we did get a domestic violence bonus project funded last year. We did not get the permanent housing bonus project funded. With the reallocated funds, we're very optimistic that we'll get a new dedicated housing or dedicated plus project funded in this year's competition.
Thank you very much, Lord. And so this last part of our meeting is just a beginning discussion. It almost kind of relates to what we just voted on, as far as it relates to reallocating funding and permanent supportive housing specifically. And it is pertaining to retention of our landlords. I know that I have had several recent experiences as a service provider with properties being sold to new landlords, and then those new landlords wanting to quickly exit our folks from those units and no longer work with the continuum of care or the resources that that we have available to us, such as Section 8 vouchers. And so I've also heard from some community partners about losing landlords, just landlords we've always had, just losing them and them not being willing to be a part of our system anymore. And so it brings up this very important thought for me, and I think for other providers as well, about balance. I think that, we're trying to do a really, really good job at hitting the high needs population and trying to get them housed. But at some points, it's kind of detrimental to our landlord mixture. Every landlord might not be as friendly or patient or accommodating and understanding to our clients. And let's face it, some of my clients have huge learning curves, to housing that we didn't even think about. I think sometimes the documentation is the hurdle that we think is the hurdle, but what we find out is that people don't know how to clean an apartment. They just don't have those skills, or they don't have the best social skills or the best interactions. And so I've literally had landlords imply that my clients were dangerous when my clients were her to flee. Just because of their language and their presentation in the world. You got to think about it. A lot of our folks are traumatized. They've had a lot of systems fail them. They've had to be very aggressive and persistent to get their needs met. They don't always deliver that in the best way. And so, it may cause some uneasiness in people, but, just because our folks have to be a little bit more vocal or verbal, doesn't mean that they are at any greater risk to you for being harmed because you're working with them. And so a lot of times it takes supportive persons to be able to be available to those people to kind of help them navigate those worlds. And so in thinking about that, this idea of balance and how do we house people and continue to make the progress that we make in our system and in our mission and our goal to end homelessness, while at the same time trying to be as not selective, but thoughtful and a little bit more considerate about how many and who we're putting where, when, and how, and what resources they have at their disposal in order to be successful. And so you guys got the agenda. You see the all the little bullet points down there. Balancing referrals, supportive housing, what that means for our current written standards. But I'm gonna start at A, and we can talk about the balancing of referrals. And I know that Hanalea has a group of folks that they prioritize for housing and things like that. So I don't know, Hanalea, if you have anything you want to share before we get into this discussion, while at the same time entertain anybody else's points on this topic, because it's very important.
So I'll give the caveat that I just got back from 2 weeks of vacation today, and I was not prepared to speak about this, but I can just kind of speak. You know, I think actually the primary issue that we have right now to the question of balancing referrals is referral volume. So this is primarily an issue for rapid rehousing, not an issue for PSH. And I am being given so few available slots in rapid rehousing that we're never getting down to maybe 1 or 2 clients a month. And if you're only going to prioritize 1 or 2 clients a month, you're never going to get below the very, very top clients, right? So even if we could get 3, 4, 5 clients, we could get through to lower vulnerability clients. So we're not talking about a huge increase, but you know, recently, you know, and Christy can probably speak to this recently, because I was going on vacation, I think Housing for New Hope asked me for like a few more than they normally do, maybe 3 or something like that. And I was actually able to give them some lower priority clients, because even just that small number increase, I could actually get down below this just like number 1 top client. So the primary issue right now, I think we actually have a system that is well set up for balancing if we could just get a little bit more than 1 at a time. And that's the primary feedback I would provide. The other thing I would say is that, you know, I'm interested to hear what the rapid rehousing folks on the call have to say, but what I'm seeing is not looking like our primary issue at this point is the vulnerability of the clients. The landlords who are pulling out are not pulling out primarily because of their experiences with our clients. It's they don't want to take vouchers anymore because they don't want to deal with the bureaucracy, and because they can get a whole lot more money without the vouchers, which has nothing to do with the vulnerability level of the client. Any client we present with a voucher just could not be taken. And so that's kind of the other big barrier we're seeing right now is just for voucher clients. So many landlords have pulled out, and it really doesn't have anything to do with our clients' vulnerability level. It has to do with the voucher itself, which is probably our largest systematic issue with landlords at the moment.
I actually disagree with that. In the last month, I've made 5 referrals for people who were placed previously where the landlord is not complaining about the voucher and is actually complaining about the tenants. And they're actually like violating people's housing rights. So I have legal aid involved in every single one of those cases. And those are not the only ones. I've been having those experiences at least for the last 12 months. So, you know, I think that the reason why you're getting so few placements also goes back to the balance. You know, only certain landlords are willing to take the chance. And, you know, frankly, most of the time, the ones that I hear that are taking the chances are the most interesting landlords. And
I mean, I can only speak from a systems level. I'm not saying there aren't landlords complaining about clients. What I'm saying is the biggest, from a systems level, the biggest holdup that we have in getting clients, like the volume of getting clients out of homelessness and into housing at the moment, is landlords not taking vouchers. That's not to say that landlords having issues with specific clients is not an issue, only that the volume, the biggest issue from a volume standpoint at the moment is the voucher pullout that we've had on a massive scale.
So this is an item for discussion. Thank you, Hanalea, for your experiences and telling us about what you see. we do have a couple service providers on the call. And I would love to hear some feedback from you guys. But I also hope that in June, we will be able to have a robust conversation with multiple of our service providers on what they feel like their needs are and how we should move forward.
Well, I guess I could share our experience that we're seeing at Housing for New Hope. We're definitely seeing a bottleneck effect in the housing process, the housing search process, where of course we can make so many referrals to be able to get more people enrolled in rapid rehousing projects, but they're simply not getting housed because of the number of landlords that we have, or maybe the lack of landlords rather, and the lack of vacancies. So of course, a lot of that was affected by the eviction moratorium, but we're seeing vacancies pop up now that we haven't seen before, yet we're still experiencing the bottleneck effect. And I relate that, I do want to agree with both Hanalea and Sharita. We're definitely seeing the lack of landlords. We're seeing a decrease in vouchers, but for the majority of Housing New Hope projects, the rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, they're not necessarily needing those vouchers to initially obtain housing. What we are seeing is landlords that haven't received 2 years worth of rent, and they're kind of tired. They're tired of housing first. They're tired of that kind of headache because with also the lack of vacancies, we saw a decrease in supportive services because a lot of service providers were not able to make those necessary home visits. We're not able to have that kind of face time with landlords. So we do see landlords they're just ready to at least take a break from COC clients. We also see a large amount of landlords, again, because they're also having financial troubles. They're either skyrocketing their rents to make up for that difference, or they're selling their properties, which we are seeing a lot of what Sharita has mentioned. The new property owner comes in, honors the lease, the existing lease for a little bit, and then quickly exits our COC clients. So our rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, instead of just obtaining housing and then working on supportive services rather, we're seeing them work to obtain housing 3 or 4 times during their duration of participation in the rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. And that's independent of vouchers. Simultaneously, we also have these, set aside vouchers that Policy and Planning did approve. We talked about it last month, but we're seeing a dramatic decrease in landlords accepting those vouchers from DHA. So we're not necessarily seeing the movement out of rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing so that we can replace those with new referrals. So the bottleneck really is created at the housing search phase and getting those folks to obtain housing. And we're seeing it system-wide. We're seeing street outreach clients just waiting on the, you heard Hanalea say that there was 78 singles and 19 families just waiting so that they could be in the shelter, because the shelters and their reduced capacity is people are not moving forward. Exactly. So it's creating a bottleneck for everybody. And this is, well, I don't want to say it's independent, but it is confounded by landlords not being able to accept the vouchers for their reasons with DHA.
I would like to say from Entry Point, I know we get a lot of calls from people who feel like they need to go on a shelter waiting list because they have vouchers and they cannot find anyone to accept a voucher, to the point that they're now homeless. And it's not that they don't have, I mean, they've really been trying to find and they just cannot find the housing. And so they're opting to see if they can go on the shelter waiting list. And also, we get a lot of calls all day at Department of Social Services from people who, the same scenario where the landlord is selling. I mean, these are people who've never been homeless before, but because the landlord has sold the building and the rent has been increased to the point that they can't afford it, now they're finding themselves in a situation that they've never been in before. And it's just, I mean, the calls all day, housing. My landlord sold the building, I can't afford the rent. Never been homeless before, I don't know what to do. I've never been in this situation, or the vouchers. And I've had landlords tell me in reference to the vouchers that I think some of the feedback I've gotten is they don't want to deal with housing authority and the red tape. You know, they're getting their money 2 and 3 weeks late, and they feel like that they can, you know, why deal with that when they can rent it and get twice the rent and not have to deal with late payments. And I don't know, it needs to be more competitive as to how much you're offering for these vouchers, because I mean, you're dealing with inflation, which is affecting a person. I mean, a landlord, this is their private business. This is just the feedback. I mean, this is my business and my livelihood. So if I'm only getting $1,000 from housing authority, and I know I can rent this property and get $2,000 and not have to deal with late payments. So that's been some of the feedback I've gotten from Entry Point. And again, people are opting to see if they can go on the waiting list because they're afraid, you know, that they have not been able to find housing with this voucher. They don't want to be homeless.
But I hear your concerns. We have been talking in the executive meeting about trying to get to the table with DHA to ask some questions, to figure out the climate, figure out what's going on. I can tell you they've had a lot of staff turnover. A lot of the key people that were go-to folks, they're all gone. They're not there anymore. And so that means we are newly building relationships again that we thought we had built. Colin and I actually a week or so ago were talking about this option of increasing the vouchers value. I didn't know that was an option until Colin said it was an option, but that still means that it's going to, on some way, we're going to be impacted even if we do that. So if they increase the vouchers, then that means there's fewer vouchers. There are fewer people because, you know, you just can't have both ways. And so I think it makes this whole conversation that we have right now even more important, because if we do that, that means we're already agreeing that we're going to serve fewer people. Then what are we going to do with the people that are left? You know, so.
What I will say about increasing the value of the voucher is that, you know, the EHVs were a natural experiment in that, because EHVs go up to 125% of AMI. And unfortunately, we have not seen a big effect. I just pulled the data, actually just by chance, for someone else today, and the average search time for someone with an EHV compared to an HCV is 5 days less. So, you know, to be honest with you, I don't think the amount is the primary issue. Not in terms of the amount, you know, if it was like we could double it, that, you know, that's another conversation. But with the amount range that is realistic for us, like 100 to 125 kind of thing, honestly, I don't think it's going to have a big impact. The amount that rents have inflated in the area, it's just far past anything we could do with the vouchers. And the reality is, actually, many of these landlords who are pulling out are still renting within the voucher range. They just don't want to deal with the voucher itself.
Absolutely.
So, you know, just my own experience is that the amount of the voucher is not the primary problem. I think the influx of out of area landlords that don't have a relationship to the community, that have more of a corporate system, and the kind of the failure to build and maintain these relationships as these properties are sold is the primary issue that we have both on our end and on DHA's end. They've had so much staff turnover. and for a long time have had, even, when they were fully staffed, really have not had capacity to really do that kind of relationship building and outreach and that is needed to when you have the disadvantage that you have with the voucher. Honestly, I think the range that we could really build is really secondary to some other major issues that we would have to address.
Yeah, so I'm listening to you. I will say to everybody, I've been doing this in this community for, oh my goodness, over a decade. DHA's relationship has ups and downs. This is the worst down that we've had in the last about 12, 13 years. It's the worst down. So, I don't know what we need to do, how we need to partner with them to get us in a better place as it relates to like housing and finance. I think at one point you weren't even paying your money to DHA. You had to send it to Raleigh because they weren't even managing their own rent income coming in. It was going somewhere else. And it might actually still be that way. But you also brought up this point about outside landlords, and it highlights it highlights a problem I think that we have on a more from the state level, because the thing that I'm finding out a lot about the new landlords that are coming from out of state is that they do not know North Carolina housing law at all. They think they can just send a person a letter and tell them they have 30 days to vacate. And that's not how North Carolina is. And so I think it's a lack of training for them when they're coming into our community to know kind of what our housing standards are. So they know that when you're just coming here, you're just not coming here to get money. You have to actually know our rules and our laws and know what you can and cannot do with tenants. Because I can tell you right now, legal aid is getting their butt kicked right now with the number of cases that I know. I've seen a ton of them for this very reason. The landlords don't know the rules. They think they can just send you a letter because maybe it's that way in California and Texas and Georgia, but it's not that way in North Carolina. So, and having to make sure our tenants understand what their rights are. Like, the landlord can't just send you a letter and then tell you have 30 days and you move. Legal aid will tell them, you stay in the unit until a legal entity tells you to get out. Do not vacate. That kind of thing. So I think, you highlight this issue, and I think that it's great that we're talking about the systems issues, but I really want us to go back to balance when we get a chance. Russ Dia asked if he could comment, and I think we've said your name several times. Russell, we're going to let you comment, but I'm going to let Hanalea finish what she was saying, and then you can comment.
Yeah, what I was gonna say about the DHA, I mean, I have not been around as long as you have, Sharita, but in the 4 years I've been, I agree that this is the lowest I've seen in terms of the relationship. I think in an ideal world, what we would have is someone at DHA who is full-time focused on the relationships with the landlords, and when you have a property being sold, they would be on top of it and proactively reaching out to the landlord. Because that's what you need, right? Because they're making reactive decisions based on a perception of what their experience with a housing authority has been elsewhere, right? They're not even necessarily doing it based on here. You need that kind of proactive work. Hey, and instead what's happening right now is actually I'm informing DHA that properties are pulling out of vouchers because at the moment there's so little capacity. Problem is, the reality, I've had conversations internal and external about this, and it doesn't really seem like realistically that's going to happen, but that's what I believe is needed, is someone full-time focused on those relationships at DHA. So that's certainly something we can make recommendations about as a group and recommend and push, but I don't know that the reality on the ground is that that's going to happen. What I've heard is that it's not going to happen unless the city funds it, and that it's unrealistic that the city will fund that given the amount of staff that the city is already funding at DHA. So that was what I wanted to add.
It's tricky for us to basically to be trying to solve the housing authority's problems for them when there are so many other parts of their system that we can't touch, that we can't improve, that are really significant part of the issue for landlords, right? I mean, we're just not in a position to sort of improve how inspections happen or the timeliness with which they happen or any of these things. And so, in a way, I feel like, I hate to give up on it, but it also feels like we've really been spinning our wheels on this for an awful long time. And I don't know what the other, alternatives there are really to kind of keep on doing as well as we can, but it's pretty frustrating, honestly.
So I have a couple of comments. One, with, Drew, what you were saying, yes, absolutely. There's not, we can't address the whole issue with the DHA landlords ourselves at the COC. But I think that one thing that we can do is, listen to the landlords, recognize what they're saying and what the challenges are in participating with the housing authority and address those challenges. For instance, one that I've heard very frequently is that they're losing money. Landlords are losing money working with the housing authority because it takes so long for an inspection to come through. And then this is an annual inspection. So we get it at the front end when they're obtaining housing, but we also get it when that lease is being renewed. And they still have that waiting period. And the landlords just simply don't get reimbursed for that. The DHA funds don't kick in until once the unit has passed inspection. So I do think that what we can do, and talking about, landlord incentives and whatnot, is that we can use those funds as a bridge, or maybe even our existing housing interventions. Maybe we could use rapid rehousing as a bridge until that unit is past inspection through housing authority, and that way the landlords would be able to receive their rents.
I actually think the landlords can't, I think with DHA, their issue is that the person can't occupy the unit until it passes inspection.
Yes,
That's
but I
the
guess
challenge.
what I'm suggesting is that they occupy the unit with rapid rehousing, and they do the inspection while the person is still there, like as they do the renewal inspections. You follow what I'm saying? What I'm suggesting?
Yeah,
But
I get what you're saying.
I
So-
hate enabling the DHA.
it is. It's definitely responsive, kind of like we were saying. It's more reactive rather than proactive.
It is a practical solution, but
Exactly. But I also wanted to, just speak to what you were saying, Sharita, about the new landlords, because we do see quite an influx. And yes, it is absolutely true that that the new landlords aren't necessarily versed in landlord-tenant law. And but what I've seen in our experience at Housing for New Hope is that we were able to connect tenants with educational resources on housing rights. And we've even educated landlords on this. But in my experience in working with landlords, it's kind of unfortunate, but one comment that a landlord made to me that was very salient and has stuck with me throughout the years. And it was, if we want somebody out, we can get them out. And so I'm thinking about these new landlords that are saying, I'm selling the property. You may have 30 days, 60 days or whatever to vacate the property, even though the tenant has a lease. Well, we may be able to put a Band-Aid on that and be able to finish the lease. But what happens at the end of that lease? The client, our clients will soon have to move again. And that is in line with the landlord tenant law. So it's, I think it's a combination of education, but also, we want to put good tenants in there. Our COC clients, we need to educate them a little bit more about what it means to be a good tenant. And, what our system is doing now with the prioritization is that we have so much need for permanent supportive housing, not the units, but the level of vulnerability.
Services. Yes, the supportive services. Right.
We have that need, and what we're doing is we're kind of stacking through the continuum, the barrier assessments that we give at the beginning, which Entry Point does. is we have almost like 3 buckets. We have little to no intervention. That's more like diversionary tactics. We have our rapid rehousing intervention as the next level up. And then we have our permanent supportive housing as our, final level up for our most vulnerable. And what we're seeing is that most folks are falling into that third group. And I'm sorry, most folks that need assistance in looking for housing because of our prioritization, because we can't take those referrals, as Hanalia was mentioning before, to kind of even it out and give a balance. And so I guess what landlords are looking for, at least what I hear from them, is that they want a tenant who is not necessarily been on the streets for so many years and doesn't know anything about tenancy and has to learn about how to be a good tenant. They want people that already know how to be a good tenant. So we're looking for, I'm experiencing landlords that do want to participate, but housing first or that level of vulnerability is not necessarily what they want. They're looking for folks that are experiencing situational homelessness, folks that have had a rental history before and just need a break to get them back on their feet. But that's not the type of COC clients that we're getting.
And so when I think about balance, that's what I mean. Like, no, we need a mixture, a good mix, for maybe every 2, not so long-term homeless folks, you have one that's a challenge for a landlord. You got to think about that. You have to rehabilitate people to a point, and you have to be able to massage that relationship or finesse that relationship with the landlord, that when you put that one challenge in there, it's not so bad. When we're putting 3 challenges in there at one time for a landlord, that is horrible. And supportive services is on a continuum, because I imagine, Christy, even with your rapid rehousing and your PSH, the supportive service piece that you're giving at times is way more than what you expect to be giving them. Is that correct? Because a lot of people don't have an ACT team or a CST team, and CST, let's be honest, is 6 months. So supportive services ends up taxing your staff way more, because you can't even think about taking a new rapid rehousing client if you're putting out 10 fires. Right? Absolutely. And so it brings us back to balance. Yes, we house a lot of people, but a lot of people have worked extremely hard to house that lot of people, and they're still working extremely hard. And so how do we relieve some of that? My suggestion in relieving some of that pressure is that cocktail. And that's what I have used in the 20 years of housing people of my career. I've used balance. I developed relationships with landlords that even when I have had horrible experience with one tenant, they are still willing to take a chance with my next one. And that is what I feel like we need to be doing as a continuum to not only help our folks out here on the street, but our service providers who are working their hearts out to serve these people every day. And the last thing we need is landlords turning their backs. We want people to be calling us. When one of the I had such a good relationship with one of the complexes that I work with. When the new management came on, they called me still today and tell me they have openings. They're willing to work with me because the previous landlord told them, she's really going to work with you guys. She's going to be there for the challenges. You might not get an easy person every time, but she's going to do what she says she's going to do. She's going to help the tenant. And if the tenant needs to move on, she's going to help them there too. So, I think that becomes very important. And Russ I want to hear from Russ. He's been waiting patiently to add to this discussion. But then once he's done, I want to go back and talk about supportive services as well. So, Russ.
Sure, I was just gonna say, I think just two things. One is that there have been some really good, rich conversations over the last 2 or 3 weeks, really primarily with frontline providers around some of these DHA issues. And we were able to bring in our H&H's consultant for landlord engagement to a couple of those conversations. And so she's helped them think through some of this. So as several of you have conversations, and Hanalei will make sure you get all caught up on this. I mean, she was able, because she's working right now with 4 different housing authorities in Dallas, help us think through some different approaches, not to dismiss what we're dealing with from the past, but I just appreciated these frontline folks, and they invited a few of the rest of us to sit in. We're really able to name off a lot of it being DHA process. But the other thing I just wanted to share quickly is I almost think we're needing to get to the point of having a more sophisticated level of functioning than we have right now. And I mean that both in like how we're grouping people for prioritization, but also how we're going to approach landlords. Because what I hear is, so I mean, here's the nice thing of like me not having to take notes if I'm sitting on this meeting anymore, is like I can hear we are all pretty much talking about locally based, pretty much private landlords. And that's kind of like if you look at the grocery landscape, like we're only going to talk about the one locally owned thing, not that Food Lion is here and Harris Teeter's here and what does this look like? And I think this is one of the places where, as we have more and more corporate and out of town groups, part of it is a different approach, and landlord engagement being a different thing. But really part of it is going to be this issue of having different buckets of levels of client need that we can match them with. Because a lot of groups, they won't even talk to us if we're going to send anybody beyond either folks who might come through coordinated entry, need just a little bit of help, or more traditional rapid rehousing. And if we can take a long-term view, we can build their trust, build our confidence in them, and then maybe be getting back to, they might take a PSH client. But I think for us, and I think I've preached this for 18 months or more now, just we're going to have to get a little bit more sophisticated than we've been, and think about different groups and how to approach them differently.
Hanalei, I see your comment. Are you talking about public housing?
Well, that was not what my hand was raised about, but yes, I think Drew had mentioned in the comments drafting a letter, and I was saying if we are going to draft a letter, I think that letter should also discuss the unfulfilled commitment that DHA made for, because that's the thing that's caused so much pressure on the vouchers, is that we don't have access to the public housing, which is really the resource that should be taking these clients that can't be approved anywhere else, right? That should be that safety net resource that can't work with a private landlord. And the fact that we haven't had access to that has put so much pressure on private landlords where we really can't get some of these clients in. But my hand was actually raised regarding the balance issue. So I just wanted to like kind of affirm what I said earlier and discuss any solutions to it, is, and just to kind of make it more clear, we have a big issue with volume right now that's preventing us from getting down to any lower priority clients. So we have essentially 2 providers that are actively taking clients in the COC for rapid rehousing. One is Housing for New Hope, and that's the main one that would be discussed for these lower priority clients, because the other one is Fresh Start, that at least at the moment cannot take anyone that's non-chronic, right? So it's essentially all falling on Housing for New Hope. And so that's a big part of the problem, right? Is we have some other providers, but either their funding is not, currently enough that they can take new people, or they're having implementation issues for a variety of reasons. They're not taking clients. So when you have all of this falling on one provider, Housing for New Hope, and then, maybe Housing for New Hope asks me for one client 1 week, 2 weeks later, I get one more client, you get 2 clients a month, you're only going to get those super vulnerable clients. So how do we get to the point where we're maybe doing 5 clients a month and doing it kind of all at once so that I can give more of a mix? That's the big problem right now. And that's what I was saying about when I went out of town and I actually was like, okay, well, here's what I need for the next few weeks. And I actually was able to give a mix. So I actually think our prioritization is actually set up for this, right? Our second priority clients, there's no criteria other than they've just been unable to resolve their homelessness for 60 days, right? So that's the only criteria for that group. So that is a lot of incidental homelessness, a lot of first-time homelessness. That is that group, and we set it up in that way. The problem has been, it's just such a trickle right now, and it's all coming in like one client, 2-3 weeks later, one client, that we can't give a mix. And that's the problem that for the last year has seemingly been unsolvable. We haven't been able to figure it out.
So it sounds like the issue is, kind of both ends. Like, I know on Housing for New Hope, we're not able to take new referrals because all of these people are kind of stuck in the housing search phase, yet we're not able to access more landlords because of the vulnerability level of these folks. So how do we resolve?
Yeah,
How
I
do
mean,
we
Christy, I
approach
think it
that?
is. It's almost like a refresh, right? At some point. And it's not, I want to be clear, the reason we're talking about Housing for New Hope is because Housing for New Hope is really the only one we can talk about, not because this should only be Housing for New Hope's responsibility, right? But the
Right.
reality is a lot of it is on y'all right now. And I think that it's almost like we need a refresh of saying like, okay, we're gonna get a new cohort, right? Let's give us a bit of a larger cohort. It's actually gonna be a mix instead of the sort of ongoing trickle, so that we can do sort of like a refresh and go after from some of these landlords from y'all's end, from our end. Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of other issues that have to be resolved.
But this is what we were told we were going to get a year ago when we made some of the alterations in the prioritization. So that's where, I mean, it almost feels to me kind of like, and I'm not saying this because we're H&H. I mean, I really want this solved for the system, trust me, and was really moved by what a lot of these frontline case managers shared 2 weeks ago. But it's almost like if I was running like an auto repair shop and I had two bays to work from, and there was a whole line of people that just needed an oil change, but I insisted that they couldn't get to the oil change until the 6 people that needed like their engine replaced got cared for. Like, I'm going to create a massive problem that's only going to keep building up. And I just don't know how we get to the point where there's some lower need people coming through on a regular basis.
Well, I mean, I can give an example. I don't want to pick on Housing for New Hope, but I want to give an example. I've had a couple clients in site-based PSH for quite some time. In the midst of this recent change with the priority and the level of people who have come into those sites, I've had clients who were stabilized now go into perpetual crisis in PSH because of how their environment changed. The PSH project no longer became a therapeutic place for them to be. That is very concerning. And Christy and Russ know I have sent the emails, everything. You know, it just became a place where it was not a good place for a person who needed the service. And so we have to think about that. Not saying that you have to take somebody who's way down on the prioritization list, but there has to still be some kind of balance, because you got to make sure that the people that are around these people that need a lot of needs are also not being triggered. Because then that puts a lot of pressure on the staff. I don't know, how, before I came here, I ran a shelter in Chapel Hill. I had to do the selection of who came in the door. And I always had to look at who I had in there and what that other person's challenges were in order to pick who was the best next fit, because there was no overnight staff. And so if something went down, I had to drive from Durham to Chapel Hill at 4:00 in the morning. So I had to think about, what I was doing. And so, that's where the balance thing came into play. And every time I went against that cocktail, I had a problem. We have to figure out a way that we can serve both ends, or we're going to continue to create chronicity. And all of the people that the landlords are saying they don't want to take. So how do we do that? How do we work together? Everybody is important. It's no way to do this thing. It's really, really tricky and really, really complicated. But how we approach it and how we do it could either play to our advantage or our demise. And we have to figure that out. And I don't have any answers. So we talked about balancing referrals, and I'm glad we had that conversation. In light of next month's meeting, hopefully we'll hear from some folks and really get down to it. And then do we want to talk about supportive services a little bit now, or you guys think that we have saturated this conversation? We have about about 20 minutes left. Any additional insights, questions, concerns? Any questions that you think we want to ask of those frontline providers that we have in next month's meeting? Any specific questions?
Sharita, this has been really active, interesting conversation. I think that, additional feedback from frontline folks, additional feedback from the Housing Authority would be interesting, but kind of per the comment I put in the chat, I feel like we basically know, kind of, at least from the vantage point of the Housing Authority, what issue or issues, we would like to highlight and somehow go higher up the chain of command and give a little higher visibility to. So I didn't want the idea of, maybe that, which I feel is still sort of getting used to engaging in advocacy, but which I think is a really important role for the body, to somehow communicate a little more loudly than perhaps we have, how big issue it is for our community that, such a small portion of these vouchers end up being.
You're going out, Drew. I don't know why.
I don't know either. I'm sorry. I didn't want the idea of a letter to the DHA board and city council to get lost. I feel like, we can always, kind of tie ourselves up for another month, 2, 3, getting additional detail on the problem, but we've known about this for a long time. And I feel like there's maybe an opportunity to do something different, which would be to really kind of raise the profile of the issue a little bit.
Okay. I agree with you. Does the committee think the drafting of a letter, does the committee support us doing that and moving forward with that?
I think it's an excellent idea. It sounds like this has been an issue for quite a while, and something needs to move to push their hand a little bit. In addition to sending the letter, I would think that maybe some recommendations would be in order, as this committee and the service providers that are working to get families into, or individuals, families, whatever, into these homes need to have some kind of a say in what's going on that's impacting the families. I mean, and if there's a problem with the bureaucracy of the vouchers, then what's the problem? Is it a policy with HUD that's the problem, or is it the management of the vouchers at the local level with DHA? I just think there's a lot of questions, and I mean, I admit that I'm new to this community and this DHA, but I have worked with the Fayetteville Metropolitan Housing Authority, and I do know that when a city or the county or someone of a body that is representative of the homeless population comes before the Board of Commissioners for the Housing Authority with some concerns and some recommendations, that's tend to be, you tend to listen to that. And it might at least give us an opportunity to get a discussion started as to what are the problems that are going on there. We think we know, but maybe we don't. And how do we work together with you, Housing Authority, to make sure that we're addressing these concerns, for our population at large? I think that's a piece of it. So I think it wouldn't hurt to push their hand a little bit by sending a letter, at least, with some recommendations attached.
Right. Thank you, Tammy. I actually sent Colin a message. I asked him, did this have to come from the full HSAC, or could policy and, is this something that policy and planning can do? Because I am definitely willing to, in collaboration with community development, our lead agency, draft something if it needs to come from policy and planning. There was a question in the chat box finally about the emergency housing vouchers and how many people had successfully been placed versus how many were allocated. I just don't want to miss the question.
Sure, I can pull that up right now. So, so with the caveat that some people may have been housed while I was out of town, and I won't know that until later this week. So we have a total of 68 allocated EHVs. And as of 2 weeks ago, before I went out of town, 6 of those folks had been leased up. Now, all 68 of the allocated vouchers have not been issued, though. So that's just a caveat. But out of that full 68 allocation, we had 6 lease up. There were a number of additional clients who were somewhere in the approved but not yet inspected, or approved and inspected but not yet moved in place when I left town. So I'm assuming some additional folks have moved in, but I would be willing to bet quite a bit that it would definitely be under 10.
Do you know how many total have been released out into the community?
I can tell you that. Give me 1 second. 51 are active in some way.
So there are 51 active and only 6 lease ups.
6 lease ups as of 2 weeks ago.
As of 2
I'd
weeks
be
ago.
willing to bet probably 2 or 3 more leased up while I was out of town.
Of the 51, how many people have gone beyond their time? Do you know?
Expired? I don't think any EHVs.
None have been expired?
To my well, let me just, I know some have withdrawn because they found other things. But let me just double check that I don't think any. No, because it wouldn't make any sense for it to have expired, because you can have it for up to a year, and we started issuing in December of 21. So we wouldn't have hit the time yet.
You have up to a year on the EHVs? Oh,
on HCVs and EHVs. Yeah, you get a year. That's statutory. That's the maximum by HUD.
I didn't know it was that long. I thought it was 120 days.
So the 120 days is the initial search period that they give you, but you can ask for extensions for up to a year.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, I just wanted to get that question answered before we left. So it sounds like I don't have any additional questions. We're just looking for feedback from the frontline providers. Y'all tell me this if I'm correct, for next month's meeting. And then there was a mention of a letter that I think we have to formally vote on. So I need a motion, a second, and a vote. Is that correct, Colin?
So what was the question, Sharita?
So I'm trying to, as far as this conversation that we've had, what we need to do. So I asked if there were any questions that we wanted to prepare for the frontline discussion for next month's meeting. Doesn't sound like we have any specific questions. We just want to get some feedback. And then Drew mentioned his earlier mention in the chat box about a letter to DHA with some recommendations and some concerns. And then I also think I heard something about maybe presenting at a board meeting. I'm not sure. But do we have to vote on whatever our next step is as it relates to the letter or the board meeting?
Sorry, I had to step away for a moment. Reginald poked his head in to ask me some questions. And while I had him, I shared that, we really need DHA to get to an HSAC meeting. And we've been asking multiple times.
Yes, we have.
And we keep getting brushed off. And so Reginald asked for some information so that he can go have a different conversation with Anthony Scott and see if he can maybe kind of push that to get them to come because he understands that we do need to hear from them. And they also need to fill their seat on the HSAC board, which they have not filled in close to a year. So before we start sending letters, let's see where that goes. I think having the conversation, having the frontline providers come back next month, if there are specific things that we want feedback on, to make sure we get that out, or there's specific data that they can share with us, that would be great. If you, yeah, and as Anna said, if you want to send a letter, we do need a vote. We,
Well, I was clarifying, Colin, that Sharita's question was specific to what was required, and if she wants to send it on behalf of the committee, a vote is needed. If she wants to send it on behalf of herself as chair, a vote is not needed.
Can I just observe, again, as I said earlier in the chat, I don't mind having the housing authority come in and give a presentation, but I probably would need both of my hands and the fingers on those hands to count the number of presentations about voucher uptake from the housing authority that I have heard in HSAC meetings since I've been on it. And so, I mean, I want us to recognize that this is also kind of how we get into a bureaucratic loop-de-loop that just goes round and around and around and never actually changes anything about what is going on. And so I don't mind having them come in again, but maybe these are things that we could pursue. I don't know.
Well,
Or whatever.
I think there's some transparency issues. You know, when we give them the opportunity to speak, they get to tailor the conversation in the way they want it, and it becomes you know, not the conversation they probably don't want to have, because we know that they're getting attacked. They've been getting attacked for the last, what, 2.5 years with since Matt Douglas-Harris. So they're on the defensive, but this is not the way to operate in this community. It just does not work. And so, you know, I think the letter is good because, for one, I feel like HSAC should always have a advocacy wing and some kind of visible existence in the community beyond our monthly meetings. That's just how I feel. You know, if we have to get homeless people to march down the street, then I say, let's do it. I'll be right in the front with the bullhorn, leading the cause. I just feel like we don't do enough of that. You know, when the residents at DHA stood up for themselves, things changed. When they stood up for them, did it get 100% better? No, but I feel like they were able to get ends that they didn't have before. I feel like somehow, I also don't believe in objectifying groups of people either, but if there is some way that we can advocate for our needs in a more visible way, I always feel like we should be doing that. I know that some people on the committee might not be able to do it because of their connections to different entities, but I feel like those who don't have those connections should be empowering our folks to be able to speak up for themselves. HCHs all over the country have speakers bureaus and people going out doing talks on homelessness and housing. I don't know why we're not doing it.
the other piece is, if we want DHA to come talk, we can get the feedback at our June meeting, find out what do we want DHA to talk about, what questions do we want them specifically to address and answer, and send that to DHA and say, hey, here is specifically what we want you and need you to talk about. And if they go off script, we have the questions and ask the questions in the meeting because they've had time to prepare and bring us solutions to those. If it's, hey, how are you going to address bringing new landlords in? If it's going to be, how are you going to speed up your inspection times? How are you going to speed up processing payments? Those are things that they can answer, but we just need to come up with what is it that we want them to talk about, give it to them ahead of time, and hold them to answering the questions in their presentation. That way it's meets our needs and they have a clear expectation of what they're presenting.
All right.
If we wanted to do that, we'd be looking at maybe a June meeting, the June HSAC meeting, since if we're going to take July off, otherwise it'd be August before DHA came. And that would be assuming we could get all of our thoughts together early in June to give them enough time to answer it.
I will entertain suggestions from the committee at this time. We do have, not to rush anybody, we have 4 minutes left in our meeting. How do we want to move forward? Beyond the fact that next month we will have frontline providers coming to talk to us. How do we want to move forward on anything as it relates to DHA and our challenges?
I mean, I like that idea to get the questions and send to.
You're going out. Is that just me that your voice is going out, Levette, or everybody?
I was gonna say, I like the idea of getting the questions from the frontline providers and sending them over to DHA and giving them a chance to respond to those specific questions rather than letting them decide, you know, what type of presentation. I mean, I think that's a good idea. That's my thought.
I think that's a reasonable approach too. I think that, and then if it doesn't, if their presentation still is very lacking, we still have the opportunity to write the letter. But I do think that that initial reach out is allowing them to come forward, knowing what questions we have for them. And then if they still don't answer the questions, then we can follow up with a letter.
Okay. So is everybody in agreement with the presentation with prepared questions first and then follow up with the letter if needed? Do I need to, is this a formal vote?
I don't think
Or
you
we
need
can
to
just
vote on
agree?
it.
Okay, so I need a motion. I have people voting already. I need a motion.
I move that we, excuse me, go with the, proceed as suggested in Sharita's statement, which is to have the presentations, the questions, and then followed up with a letter.
I have a motion. I'll take the second.
I'll second that.
Who is that?
Janine Gordon.
Hi, Janine. Good morning. It's
Hi,
good to hear your voice. And now, all those in favor, you have the right to put yes in the chat box. If you're not or abstaining, you have the same right. It looks like our motion carries and we are at 11:59. And we had a great meeting today. I have a smile on my face today. Sometimes I don't have a smile on my face. Great meeting, everybody. I look forward to our June meeting. Today I will be my last day in the office, and I will be spending the rest of the week at the National Healthcare for the Homeless Conference, and they have a whole presentation dedicated to revamping PSH, and I'm really excited about it. So I'll be bringing that back to the group next month's meeting. I guess I'm entertaining a motion to adjourn.
If you have, Sharita, if I may, if you have questions that you specifically want DHA to answer, please feel free to email them anytime. We'll just start putting together the list of things that we want to do. So we're not trying to scramble at the end of the June meeting, and we'll plan to invite them to the June HSAC meeting.
And I will, Jerome, you asked about documents from this meeting. They should be uploaded to our durhamcoc.org website. I don't know when. Is that correct, Ruby? All of the handouts and things like that, they go to the site as well, right?
The handouts have been emailed out to everyone.
Including Jerome and
Yes.
Tammy.
Got 'em.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you should have them, Jerome. We try to get them out to you as soon as we can, but sometimes it's a little delay. So if you have any questions and if you want to go back and read anything, that would be on the durhamcoc.org website. Okay. Great meeting, guys. It's 12:01. I went over time. No final questions. Do I need a motion to adjourn?
Ms. Helen, I move to adjourn.
All right. Second.
I'll second that as well.
Janine, you're on a roll. Can you call
I'm
me?
telling you
Can
what.
you call me when the meeting's over? I need to talk to you. All right.
You got my number.
Meeting. I guess you have to put yes in the chat box about adjourning the meeting, and it is adjourned. You guys have a great May.
Take care, likewise.
Mhm.